Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the EFL Fantasy Podcast. My name is Angus,
And my name is Ben.
and it's time for part three of the season five of Gaffr, the 2024-2025 season. Part three of the season preview. We've got the final eight teams to go through. And then, in theory, people will be ready and fully informed to put their teams together. Um, but before we get into that, first things first, Dan, how are you?
Yeah, I'm good, Angus. Obviously, we recorded the first two last night. Those two have now been released. And we've got one more to do before finalising our team. So, got the news today Sarah's gone. So, that maybe that's a little bit more money to spread across your team with Somerville and Sarah going out. But yeah, I'm looking forward to these eight teams. Some of them are have had eventful summers, let's just put it that way.
Yeah, definitely. There's an interesting list of teams here, and I'm sure, some people will be very aware of the teams you've got left. Some people probably not thinking so much about who's left over, but we've certainly got some interesting ones to cover today. A little bit of a range as well, which is always good. Um, so without further ado, we'll just sort of dive in and get in the same format as the previous two podcasts. So if you've listened to those, you should know roughly what we're going to come with for this one. But the first team, we're coming to you, Dan, for Oxford United.
Yeah, so Oxford went up through the playoffs, not being in the second division for I think it's nearly 30 years. So a nice change to some of the teams we've had before, and they've been super busy. Some of the key players in Peter Chioso, Curry, El Mizzoni, Sibley, Placheca, Cumming, Phillips, Volks, Ingram, and Abe, which was a loan. So a lot of a mixture of signings there. We'll go into deep depth on a few of them when we go through the starting 11. But yeah, it's a mixture. It's some with high potential. There's some coming towards the end of the careers like Phillips, and you've got some that have been in the championship and maybe it's not quite worked out for one reason or another, like Kiosa or Placheca or Sibley. So yeah, it's a mixture of players where I think are going to want to prove themselves that they're at this level. There's eight transfers out, but the main one is Josh Murphy, which if anyone watched the playoffs, he was man of the match in the playoffs, and the last 3 months was probably one of the best players in League One. So yeah, that will be a loss. They've brought in a few wingers to try and replace him, but not ideal for him going to Portsmouth, who could potentially be a relegation rival. Out of those, Angus, any of them stand out?
I think they've done business in what feels like two sort of pots, which I think is quite clever in that they brought in some players that feel like sort of floor raisers.
Yeah,
You say someone like Kyoso, he's shown bits and pieces, but I think it's just a bit more sort of a solid player at this level. Will Volks very much falls into that sort of pot of just sort of like, okay, you're guaranteeing a bit more stability, you're raising the level a little bit, but you're not necessarily sort of kicking beyond that. And then they brought in some really exciting like ceiling raisers. So, for example, Ebioway is a big example of that. Someone like that, just potentially taking them beyond what they have. And, it might not work, but, it's taking that, okay, this could be a real sort of upside player. I think Flechetta is another one of those. Where I wouldn't really include him as a floor raiser because we haven't seen enough of him sort of regularly, but there's that potential there still, I think. So I think they've done it quite well in that regard. I think they're making a good go of it. You know, I think there'll be a couple of things that will sort of play a key role. You know, we've talked. Brannigan was not among those departures, and I think
Yeah,
that's sort of as key as anything, really. But yeah, I think it's been interesting, particularly sort of with the sort of like the way you can identify those in two different groups has been quite interesting for me.
yeah, I agree. Moving on to the starting lineup, Oxford were one of the teams where we didn't get someone to give us the information. So I've sort of followed an account and with their squad depth, and hopefully they're correct. So in goal, he's not fully sure whether it will be Cumming or Ingram. Obviously, I think they've both come in this season. Ingram was at Hull. Unfortunately, he's priced at 5 million in the game, whereas if Cumming starts, he's 4.5. So yeah, I think it might be a goalkeeper battle. I'd expect it to be a 4-3-3 with Kioso on the right, Moore and Brown at centre backs. Although I think personally, I think they need to sign a centre back or two. Definitely one, I would have thought. And Joe Bennett at left back. Volks will probably be the DM with Brannigan and Rodriguez. Although they do have like Goodrum and Sibley and players like that. So I think that'll be the start. I'm pretty confident, but they do have pretty good depth in centre mid for a promoted side. And then you've got either Pacheco or Phillips on the left, Eboué on the right with Harris up front. We've seen Harris in the championship. He's a keen worker. He might get 5 to 10 goals, but I wonder if they don't really have any backup to him. So I would expect a striker to come in, whether that's permanently or maybe a loan from a Premier League club. So out of those, Angus, so it's a fairly solid side with depth throughout. I think with maybe a couple of key positions that they need to upgrade in.
Yeah, so I think there's interesting options. I think it's not necessarily a team that you're going to dive into unless it's for sort of your budget options at the start of the season. Like there's been times when I've been putting a draft together where, for example, I mean I had one of the 4.5 forwards earlier on, but I've moved away from that. But there's been times where I've had Will Vaults as sort of the
Yeah,
fifth
4 point.
mid at 4.5, which I think initially is probably what you're going to be looking at Oxford for, until we sort of get more of a look at them. But I think there are potential options there. Brannigan, obviously, sort of set pieces, penalties, all that. I'm a big fan of Ruben Rodriguez. I sort of watched him play a couple of times in the National League for Notts County, and I was, you could see there that, like, not necessarily to the Championship, but it was like, he was a player that was going to kick on and rise up, and has that ability about him. But initially I probably won't be going with any of them, but I do think that there's potential for them to be interesting as the season goes along.
Yeah, I think that's where I stand. I think I've mentioned in the um, the first pod we did where we were reviewing the prices that I do. Brannigan will be on penalties and things like that. So that's why he's 6. And they've got a lot of these sort of attacking mids, whether it's wingers or set, cams who could be a good option at times. Harris is 5.5. It's a little bit cheaper than some of the ones we have been discussing, but I think they're going to have to get a striker in personally. And defence, I don't hate like a Kioso. I think he'll be quite attacking, but I want to see how good they are defensively before I fully go in, because there's probably better 4.5s, and I'm not sure. Maybe Curry if he gets the left back, but he's at 4 million, but I think it will be Bennett to start. So, where do you think they'll finish, Angus? I think they've recruited fairly well, but I still expect them to be probably bottom six, bottom eight, and maybe relegated, unfortunately.
Yeah, I think they will be in and amongst it for relegation. It's just the practicalities, and particularly the playoff winners from each league are naturally more likely to be one of the bottom teams, whether that's bottom three, bottom six, upon promotion. Um, I'll say bottom six because I don't sort of want to commit to saying anyone will be
Yeah,
bottom three, in part because that's so variable. But at the moment, despite thinking they could potentially be interesting, I do sort of think probably bottom six for them this season.
yeah, I think I would agree.
I'd also just like to shout out a couple of sort of blasts from the past, particularly for anyone who's any sort of prospect watcher. Josh McEachran, an iconic one from Chelsea,
Chelsea, yeah.
and Marcus McGuane, who was a very
Forest,
highly rated prospect at Arsenal, actually went to Barcelona, and
wow.
then came back, and I think has cycled through a little bit. But for those who are watching prospects at big clubs in the past, those two names will probably jump out. Like I say, particularly McEachran. But I just quite enjoyed that personally as well. Um, but yeah, I think it's interesting. It's nice to have a different team. I think
Yeah,
that's
yeah,
the thing that always comes back to. It's nice to just have a different team in the league and in the game. Um, Next up, we have Sheffield Wednesday, um, which I've got some of the information for. Um, there was a little bit, particularly on the fantasy side, of gaps which we can obviously potentially fill in. This was from 1867 News. They said in terms of the key incomings, they said there's been a number. Getting Beadle as goalkeeper was obviously key for them, and sort of particularly getting him for another season. Um, he was obviously sort of important for them last year. And they also highlighted getting Max Lowe and Jan Valery as two sort of fullbacks fullbacks or wingbacks, depending on how they decide to play, but an option on either side, um, being sort of the key options there. Um, Dijon Bernard re-signing, sort of almost including that because he was sort of temporarily away from the club and has come back. They also got Josh Windass to sign a new deal because he was another one that was potentially going to move away. They did get a contract extension with Barry Bannon as well. Um, Not any massive sort of outgoings. Obviously, they lost a couple of loan players in Poveda and Ike Ugbo.
yeah,
Um, they've sort of been trying quite hard to re-sign him. Whether they're successful is another matter. I know that they've also been linked again a couple of times this summer with uh, pod favourite Duncan Maguire, um, but nothing sort of come there. But it does sort of suggest that that's where they're looking. Um, they said they're still unsure exactly what the lineup will be and the formation. Last season they had to work with whatever they had at the club, and so they don't think they've seen Royals' preferred formation. They said what they do know is he's meticulous in his preparation, happy to change the lineup according to the team they play, whether they're home and away, which I think we did see at times last season. Um, they did say they expect them to play probably line up with two holding midfielders and three attackers behind a central striker. Um, and they're at their strongest in terms of the wider attacking forwards and potentially a little bit weaker in central midfield, which I think is something we would sort of go along with. Um, but in terms of the the sort of who might be on the cards there, or just initially in terms of some of the potential lineup stuff, we can sort of, I guess, fill in some of the sort of not quite gaps, but um, in terms of filling in the detail of who those players might be that they're mentioning. I think in central midfield, we're probably talking about, well, Bannon, um, with they've had a few additions in midfield, and so it's
Ingleson, I think.
I think that's the most likely one. They've obviously added Chalabar.
Yeah,
Um,
I saw Palmer has played a few games as a DM, but I'm not sure that that sticks.
yeah, no, I think that feels a little bit like, shortage of numbers and that sort of thing. Um, in terms of the attacking players, they've obviously brought in Jamal Lowe, who would expect to start. I would probably expect Windass to start, particularly as sort of an attacking midfielder. And then you're probably looking at Gassama or Masaba.
Probably, yeah. I don't know too much about Kabaki,
Yeah. Um,
so I wonder if he's gonna get eased in.
yeah, potentially. I think they have some options there, as they say, in terms of like they can go different ways and potentially sort of be a little bit more horses for courses there. Um, and then up front at the moment, it's very light. They've got Kadamata
Yeah.
and Smith primarily, and I think it makes sense that a striker is what they're really focused on.
Do you think Lowe will start the season up front, and then if when they sign the striker, he goes to back to the wing? Because I'd have thought he'd play. I think.
Yeah, I think that might be the solution early on. I think obviously they'd like to get sort of more of an actual sort of number nine in, but it wouldn't surprise me if early on that was the solution, to be honest. Or even sort of one of these attacking mids being the person who plays through the middle,
Could just
is
play
possible.
Windass like a
Yeah,
false
might
nine or something.
could do that sort of thing. So yeah, so I think they did sort of mention that they felt that sort of that they had the under the radar asset being Osama, which I think he did do quite well last season, and I think he did go a little bit overlooked. Um, they sort of said they didn't really give much else in terms of fantasy assets. I think we've talked about some of the players. I'm obviously a long time sort of big fan of Josh Windass, so we'll keep bringing him up. But I do think he is interesting, particularly in the style that Royal wants to play. That sort
Yeah, I
of
agree.
high energy pressing style. He is someone that can thrive in that sort of role. Jamal Lowe is someone that's familiar to us. I did like Masaba last season, but I think, particularly um, Max Lowe and Jan Valery,
Yeah,
um, two players that do have a little bit of pedigree. So I do think it's potentially interesting options there. But I think the interesting thing there might be other players you want to mention, but we're mentioning quite a few players here.
yeah. It was a complete contrast to the start of last season, isn't it?
Yeah, I think that's the big thing with them. I mean, even Beadle, we've spoken in other pods about the 5.0
Yeah,
keepers. I think he's another one. Just in that, well, he's literally another 5.0 keeper, but I think he's another one that can be considered
yeah, I
in that
agree.
range. Um, they also said briefly, just in terms of the finishing position, they sort of were singing the praises of Roll, and I think they were roughly the eighth best team in the championship after he came out. And it came in terms of the record, and they do think that they're in with a chance of competing for the playoffs, um, and that it wouldn't necessarily be the biggest shock if Roll was able to get things right with the team, that they could get into the playoffs. And I think, I don't know about you, but sort of like particularly that sort of ninth, 10th ish, just partially based on where they were last season, particularly if they can get a striker in, where, things break right and you end up in sixth. It wouldn't shock me, but I'd sort of that's roughly where I would see them.
Yeah, I think you have to be careful with a team that signs a fair amount of players. I think they've done some good signings, and I think they've probably brought the overall squad probably up to mid-table squad. Um, Danny Rule is we think is a good manager, and if he keeps improving, then they could get in the playoffs. But I wonder if it's going to be similar to QPR, where they might just finish mid-table, which think is a good season for Sheffield Wednesday. Um, yeah, yeah, and I also think at times we'll be interested in some of their players this year.
Yeah,
So yeah, it's definitely a team I've got an eye on at the start. Maybe for a defender, I think, if I'm being honest.
yeah. I mean, I think they're another one that were obviously particularly strong when, like, defensively, and I think that's where a lot of the interest will fall. Um, the next team that we've got is Blackburn, which means we're coming back to you, Dan.
Yeah, so I got Darren from the Man On podcast. Um, I'd like to thank him because he basically had to do it again because he replied so quickly that basically he's sold a couple of players and signed a lot. So the key incomings um, they've been quite busy. They got Gay up front, Ohashi. They managed to sign McFadzean back. His contract run out, so it was just a matter of whether they brought him back in. Danny Bath as well, another experienced centre back, and I think that's it. Oh, Andy Vyman as well, who got released at Bristol City after a loan spell at West Brom. The key outgoing is Sam Gallagher up front. They've also lost a few players back on loan, and I suppose we've got to talk about Sammy Smodics, who there seems to be a bit of a stalemate between Blackburn and Ipswich. Blackburn valued him closer to 20 million, and Ipswich offered 6. So that's a big gap away. And normally these transfers will happen, but Blackburn aren't looking to sell him on the cheap. I think he's got definitely. I think it's probably 2 years in an option, so that
Hmm.
they can hold out quite a long time here. So, any of those signings inspire you, Angus? I know it's tricky with um, when it comes to Gay and Ohashi because we're not experts, but Andy Vime and Danny Bath, McFadzean, the two centre backs is basically says what it does on the tin, doesn't it? It's they struggle defensively, and you think under Eustace, if they've got any chance of staying up or pushing up the table, they're gonna have to do a lot better defensively, especially with the prospect of losing Smodics.
Yeah, I mean, I think McFadzean, obviously it's bringing him back, but I think it is sort of that just sort of depth was really necessary. Um, I don't know too much about the other guys they brought in. I'm not going to pretend to, but I think they did need to add personnel in the attacking area. So if they give them anything, that's obviously a big plus. Um, I've brought it up in a couple of places, but I'm going to bring it up again, just reminding everyone of my favourite period of last season, the Duncan Maguire saga, where they assured everyone that Duncan Maguire would then be joining in the summer anyway, and Duncan Maguire is still in Orlando.
Yeah, he's not picking up that phone call, is he?
But just any excuse to bring that up, I'm all over. Um, yeah, I sense we'll probably see a couple more um, in at Blackburn just because they're in a situation where they need more in, particularly if Smodics isn't going to play.
Yeah, I agree. So Darren thinks it's going to be 4-2-3-1. Pairs in goal, though. I failed to mention they sold Leo Volshed. It's gone back after coming in last year. So I know they have been linked with goalies. They were linked with Tim Krul from Luton, but that's gone a bit quiet. So whether they view pairs as first choice is another thing. But they seem to at least want competition in that position. Britain will be right back. Heim and Carter centre backs with Pickering left back. Travis has come back after his loan spell at Ipswich. He thinks he's going to be partnered with Trossard. And then it gets a bit tricky up front because obviously if Sammy Smodics is there, Sammy Smodics is going to play, but he's not going to be there. So I wonder if we see like a Rankin Costello play in centre mid and you play Dolan one side, Sigurdsson the other, and I'm guessing the new striker Gay up front, having lost Gallagher. So yeah, they've it's an okay team, but I do wonder if the depth could be a bit of a problem, especially when they lose Smodics. They have been priced fairly nicely, especially defence. So Darren thinks the fancy assets are pairs at 4.5. Obviously, we've mentioned a few times there's not too many 4.5s.
Yeah,
Britain at 5. We've seen
yeah.
he loves to bomb forward. He has put Sammy Smodics, but I think that's might be wishful thinking. And then Sigurdsson. He said keep an eye on Dolan, but he's 6.5 million. And we have seen at times in players a false nine as well, Dolan, but we've never seen a level consistency really. So any fantasy assets that stand out to you, Angus?
Well, I think I've sort of mentioned Tyree Stolen for the last like 3 years
Yeah,
or something, so I might as well keep going. um, but I do think he's potentially interesting. You're always sort of waiting for that Tyree Stolen breakout season. But I think he's at an interesting price if he does go on a run. He certainly seems to be one of those streaky players. So I think if he does get on a run, it's a price that you can still get to. I think Sigurdsson is interesting. Um, I'm also going to just highlight if he does get a run in the team, Markande, another one that I feel like I mentioned multiple times. That I'm just
5
waiting
million.
for it to happen. But at 5 million, you know, he is a winger. Um, And so I do think if he does get into the team, just having a 5 million winger in a team is sort of notable. Um, but yeah, I think Pear's obviously one of the few 4.5 keepers we have. Britain as well. I do think under the assumption Smodics goes, those are probably the places you're looking.
Yeah, I agree. When I first loaded up the game, I had Pickering just because I think he might be one of the best 4.5s, and I think Eustace is going to sort them out defensively. I think he's going to have to. Um, yeah, I like Dolan. I'm intrigued with a Gay just because if he's playing up front, he could do well. But yeah, I'm not optimistic with Blackburn this year. I think the the fact that their owners are struggling a bit with money and court proceedings in India, it's not ideal. So I think they're going to be bottom six. And normally, when you get bad owners, and I'm not sure if they are bad owners, but people who are struggling financially, that normally results in a high chance of relegation. So Darren put 20th, so just above, which I can understand. Not many people will want their team to get relegated, and like I said, I think having Eustace is probably better than having Thomas, and because they know they're going to be perhaps in a fight, and he'll set them up better defensively. So prediction, Angus, for Blackburn.
Moment, despite liking a number of their players, it's tough to see them sort of above bottom six, and you know, not knowing whether they have a striker is a problem, just because of not knowing anything about the players and that sort of thing. And I do think it's something where it feels like there's a lot more optimism around a lot of the clubs that they're likely to be competing with than there is around Blackburn, which is sort of the other thing that sort of leads me to that, generally speaking.
Yeah, I think that's fair.
So I think that's everything on Blackburn. So we'll move on to the next one, which is Watford. And so thank you to Joe, Amra Batman, who's given us the information for this. He's put under the key outgoings. He's put Ishmael Kone and possibly Wesley Hoot. So when he gave me this information, Hoot I think was in talks with Trabzonspor. I'm not sure. I think he's still with the club at the moment, but
Yeah, it
um,
seems highly likely he's going to go.
it's one of those that where it seems like he's going to go. Um, and then he said the key incomings are Musa Sissoko. That's one that I'm not sure we sort of expected really was Musa Sissoko to be back at Watford. Although I guess you know Watford have Watford have won every season. Um, in terms of a nostalgia player. Um, like we've had, well, Emmanuel Dennis. It almost wasn't. You couldn't call it nostalgia. In terms of how long he'd been away, but uh, he came back, and so I think there's always a thing with Watford about bringing a player back, and that's been Sissoko this summer. They've also brought in Rocco Vata, who is sort of a highly rated young player from Celtic. Um, in terms of the other one that I mentioned because I did ask Joe about him specifically is Yasser Asprilla. So there was talk at one point that he was going to be going to Rennes. That has died down. There was talk at one point previously that he was going to Saudi Arabia. That died down a bit. Um, and so there's Joe did say there's still a big chance he goes, but even these rumored moves away don't quite seem to be getting over the line. I'm not sort of talking myself into the idea that he's going to stay, particularly because he's been someone that I've been very high on coming into this season. But there does seem to be a little bit of an issue with actually getting it over the line. In terms of the likely lineup, he said he's expecting it to be in a 3-4-3. Um, Backman in goal, Porteous, Sierralta, and Pollock back. Andrews at right wing back, Sema at left wing back, with Deli Bashir and Kayembe uh, in uh, uh, in midfield, and Aspria and Chakvatadze in support of Bayo up. Before we get into some of the sort of assets and anything like that, anything else you sort of wanted to mention on Watford then?
I mean, I'm not a fan of talking about Watford, but we can get there. Yeah, it's I'm struggling a bit with Watford, and it's not because obviously I hate them, but it's a bit all over the place again with the transfers coming in, isn't it? They'll probably pull out a couple of decent ones or loans towards the end. Maybe get a couple from Udinese, but yeah, I haven't thought about putting in a Watford player in my team, and I know that might be a surprise, but sometimes I do. I have picked them in the past, but yeah, they're a massive avoid. I do think if they keep Asprilla and Chafakadze behind, if they get a striker
Mm.
better than Bayo, then I think they could maybe be a bit better going forward than they were last year. I know they created quite a lot of chances and just didn't finish them. But yeah, I'm not overly excited about Watford.
Um, yeah, in terms of the assets, Joe did say the best asset is Aspria, which won't surprise anyone. He said budget. He said Vata looked good in pre-season, and he could start if Aspria is sold. He said under the radar is Chak for Tadze, and he did also say that the finishing position prediction, he predicted them to finish 18th. So he's not feeling particularly optimistic, which I think is the sentiment that is shared by a lot of Watford fans. I think Asprilla is one that I had very high hopes for coming into the season. I'll be quite disappointed if he leaves, just because I did think
Yeah,
this could be sort of a big year for him. He was one that went in my team quite early when the game was set up, and then has sort of made his way out. He might find his way back in if he's still there. Chak Fatadze, I think, had pretty good Euros. I mean, Georgia had good
very good
Euros, but I
view.
think he had a
Yeah,
good Euros. Um, and so I think, we've got the eternal question of Imran Loser, in that if he's more involved, he could be interesting as well.
I think it's if he turns up for
Yeah,
training on time, he
yeah,
might be involved.
yeah. And Ken Sema, reliable
Uh,
player,
yeah, I
but
like Ken Sema.
I think it's one of those ones because he's reliable, but he's not necessarily going to go big. You don't necessarily look at him in the same way. I do think one that Joe mentioned that I have got my eye on is Rocco Vata, just because I think he could be a very interesting one, particularly at that lower price, if he
Yeah,
does get into the team.
yeah, I agree with that. 5.5.
Yeah. Um, so I think that's most of it on Watford. I'm not sure, how much longer you really want um,
But did we
to
do
talk about
prediction?
Watford.
Did we
Um,
do predictions?
Uh, I agree with Joe at the moment. I think that sort of 18th-ish range. It wouldn't surprise me if they're bottom six right now. I think because Aspria is still there, I give them the little boost, but it does feel like a little bit hinges on that.
Yeah, I'd probably agree. I think I probably would have them bottom six, but I'm quite aware that they could sign a couple of players, and I think there's a lot of hope for Cleverly, but it's going to be tricky. It depends how much pressure. If they view him like he's got to be top half or something, then he might struggle. But yeah, I would say bottom half this year. I think.
Yeah. Um, so that's Watford. The next one we've got is Bristol City. Um, Thank you to everyone who reached out for Bristol City. We had a little bit because we've had to move our time schedule uh, for these podcasts due to unforeseen circumstances. We weren't able to get the information for this um, in terms of in depth. So we're going to fill in a little bit. We've got a little bit of help with sort of a lineup, but we're gonna fill in a little bit otherwise. So in terms of the incomings, I think they've had three. Correct me if there's any more, but I've got Mayulu, who's a forward, Sinclair Armstrong, and Yu Hirakawa, who
They
is a
got
wide player.
Max Bird as well, but that happened in the January transfer window.
Yeah, I guess that's
He
part
come
of
back.
why I was thinking
Yeah,
about it. But yeah, this is sort of him actually joining. Yeah, in midfield. And in terms of the departures, you've got Andy Weimann, who's obviously left at the end of his contract. You've got Matty James, who's left at the end of his contract. You've got Andy King, who's retired, and a couple of guess younger players gone out on loan. But those are the main ones in terms of the first team. I think you've been able to get a sort of predicted lineup, Dan.
yeah. We asked Spencer, who's a Sunderland fan, but I think he might live in Bristol or something like that. He thinks it's going to be a 4-3-3 or 4-2-3-1. O'Leary in goal, Tanner, Weimer, Dickey and Pring, the back four. Knight and Bird sort of sitting, maybe Bird sitting with Knight a bit further forward. And the front four of Mehmeti, Bell, Wells, and Armstrong. I'm not sure about that. I wonder if we might get like Maylula starting up front instead of Wells. They have rotated at times up front the last few seasons. They've got a lot of similar sort of players, level players. So you've got players like Harry Cornick still about and Sykes as well. So yeah, overall, like you said with the transfers, they've not lost too many key players. A bit of experience, but they kept a lot of their key players, and they haven't had to do a sale yet. Although, as we mentioned in Middlesbrough yesterday, Tommy Conway looks like he's going. They're just trying to get the most amount of money for him. So overall, Angus is they finished. Was it? They've finished top half. Solid season again. Changed the manager. Were better, surprisingly, against the better sides. They were very good on their counter attacks. So, any of them stand out options wise? I've got my eye on a couple, I think.
Yeah, I think the big thing with Bristol City is particularly I was sort of thinking when you were going through that lineup, and I was thinking actually there's a few players there as well where you certainly wouldn't have a problem if they were stepping into the team, and I think that's obviously the sort of biggest thing, the most encouraging thing. I mean, you've got the new winger. I'm not going to pretend to know a lot about in Hirakawa, who can obviously step in.
Yeah.
You mentioned the likes of Sykes, Cornick. You've got Garden Hickman, who can obviously cover
Oh
in
yeah.
multiple places. You've got Ross McCrory, another one that you mentioned, who can
Naismith.
cover in multiple places. Naismith who can cover in multiple places as well. So it's also that element of you are covering multiple positions with one player, which I think is you know a positive in some ways. But I think it makes them quite interesting. I'm still a fan of Mehmeti. I think he's an interesting player. I think he's someone who struggled a little bit for output, but I think if he can increase that, he could be sort of a very interesting option. And I think the other one we have to talk about in terms of just how well he did last season was Cam Pring.
Yeah, I agree.
Did very well for bonus. I think he was up sort of. I'm not sure whether he made the top 10, but maybe sort of top 20-ish among defenders. I know he was sort of quite high up for quite a while, and so I think he's one that, in particular, that is interesting from that defence. I think we're expecting the starting defenders to all be at 5.0, which is reasonable, but I think it could give us some nice value there as well in that defence. I don't know if there's anyone else that you're sort of thinking about there.
But for me, it's probably Pring and Armstrong. I had Armstrong at the start of the game in my team, just because I think he has quite a high ceiling, and at 5.5, especially when you had like Somerville and Sarah, it was a bit trickier to get make your budget stretch. I do wonder if he will be an option at times, but yeah, it's a wait and see. They do have Hull first up, and we'll get onto Hull next, but they're struggling with players, Hulls, and especially with the way their new manager wants to play. I do wonder if someone goes big for Bristol City next week.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a shame in a way that they're losing Conway, although I do think they would also then have greater, decent capability to potentially get another player in if they wanted to with the money they would get for him. So it's not sort of a disaster for them. But no, they're a team that interests me, Bristol City, this season. I think they're a team that could do well. But
I think Bristol City are the dark horse this year. I I think they're going to be close to the playoffs and might sneak in it, especially when there's a few teams up in the air. Sheffield United, yes, they've done a few signings, but they're going to need to sign a few more. Hull, I mean, that could go anyway. And then you've got West Brom, another team we'll get on to, struggling a bit financially. Norwich have got a new manager, Solskjaer. So I wonder if maybe like because Bristol City seem quite stable and solid, whether they might sneak into the playoffs, fifth or sixth.
so I'm going to be slightly lazy and put them in the same category as Sheffield Wednesday, where I sort
Yeah,
of had
that's
them
fair.
ninth, 10th, and if it breaks right, they could be the ones in the playoffs. Similar sort of
Mm,
thing, but I think they could be, particularly like you say, if anyone's going to be in position to take advantage of whether it's teams underperforming or that sort of thing, I think they could be one of the teams in the mix
yeah,
for that. Um, but yeah, so the next team that we've got after Bristol City is Hull, which is coming back to you again, Dan. I'm sure people remember from the earlier pods that Dan has more of them today.
yeah. I've got to do some work today, Angus.
Yeah.
So we've got Danny McDonald's whole fan to contribute. Key outgoings. He has made a joke. He said, "Where do we start?" with a laughing emoji. I think we know they were heavily reliant on loan players. Plus, they sold two of their great, good, probably Premiership standard players in Greaves and Philogene. They've also two fans are also gone. You throw in Ryan Christie, not Ryan Christie. They wish they had Ryan Christie. Christie, the right back. And then the loans: Carvalho, Zahore, Delap, Morton. Their squad's not very big at the minute. They have done a couple of key incomings. Giles, they had an obligation to buy him from Luton for 4 million, 4 or 5 million. So they've done that, although Middlesbrough's still sniffing around that. And they signed Cody Drame, who has had numerous loan spells in the league. I think we'll do quite well with what we know about the new manager, which is basically we're going to score more than you. So Hull could be a lot of fun to watch this season. I'm trying to. They did sign someone else recently. They signed Marvin Malem. I think he's a winger who can also play centre mid. I don't know too much about him. So yeah, that's another key incoming. Before we go on to the lineup, Angus, are you a bit worried about Hull? Or do you just think eventually their owner is going to sign a few players?
Bit of both.
Yeah,
I'm a bit worried about them, but I do also think, when it comes down to it, they will make additions. Um, it just sort of depends what they do in that scenario because increasingly there's a number of things they need to do.
yeah, I agree. Danny has done a lineup, although they've got a week, and I'm guessing if they sign any players, they could break into this lineup. He said 4-3-3, but it will be chaos. He's basically playing for. Walter is basically known for playing all out attack. So some players like their attacking players could be great options, even like Drame and Giles. He said Panda in goal, Coyle, Jones, McLaughlin, and Jacob at left back. Seri, Slater, and Abdus, with Longman on the right, stooping him through the middle, who they had to recall because he was on loan at someone else. They needed a striker. And at the minute, he thinks Giles might play left wing, although, as I said, I think in their last pre-season game, the new transfer, Merlem started at left wing. So, yeah, I think Hull are an avoid at the minute. I do like Giles, and if he's playing left wing, that's going to pretty much be a no-brainer. But they've got miles to go to put a competitive squad out, I think.
Yeah, I mean, I think if you're going to go for Hull at the start, it's probably Giles, and
Yeah,
not much else. It's not a terrible start, but it's also just like the opportunity, particularly when they have a couple of games after that decent. They've got a relatively decent first three games, although it might not be that easy. And then they play Leeds and Sheffield United, so it might be just a case of waiting until after those games and then sort of having a look at it. In terms of where they are at that point, that basically takes you to the end of the transfer window as well. Um, so that might be the approach with Hull, but certainly if someone wanted to start with Ryan Giles, I wouldn't sort of tell them they're wrong in that regard.
yeah, I agree. Danny has said that Giles and Estupiñán might be the best option just because I think they're going to score goals. I think so. If Estupiñán is going to play, I'm not sure he's going to be first choice past the transfer window, but he could score goals. Finishing position, he said 11th, 12th, which I think they finished 7th last year. So I think that's understandable. I don't know. Personally, I'm not sure how you can predict Hull because, like we said, they're going to sign players, but whether the players are the players the manager wants that fits this apparently all-out attack style, yeah, they're up in the air. It could work, and they could get in the playoffs. We saw the pool they had in the January transfer window where they obviously went for it when they got Carvalho and Zahore and players like that. So yeah, they'll wait and see at the minute for me.
Yeah, I think I'd probably have them sort of top end of the bottom half at the moment.
Yeah,
But yeah, it really is that sort of this team, particularly as the window goes on, could look similar to how it looks now or dramatically different, and that's enough to, other than maybe Giles, is enough to put me off at the moment.
yeah, I think that's fair.
So yeah, so the next team we're sort of coming back to you for West Brom.
Yeah, so I got Tom to do this, and this was similar to Blackburn, where he done the whole team, and then they had to. I asked for an update because they then sold a few players. I guess it's probably worth to just mention that West Brom are currently under an EFL plan, which I think we saw this before with Reading, where they look over basically every transfer you do and things like that.
They
Although it
also
didn't really,
attempted to do it with Leicester and got
yeah.
told they couldn't.
So yeah, when looking at the transfers in Um, haven't been too many. Hegum, who I think is a centre back, come left back. Diakate, I think it's a centre mid. McNair, who he went on loan. I can't remember to what American side.
So he's
He's gone
signed for
permanently.
San Diego. But they don't. I think they don't come into the league till next season. So he's been loaned back until essentially, I think, the end of January.
Yeah, that's a solid signing, experience signing. And Wildsmith, the goalie who was first choice at Derby last year. I'm guessing he's coming in to be backup. They also did sign Devante Cole, which um, could be a good squad player. Key outs, and they lost a few loans, didn't they? They lost Johnson, and they lost Kit Prey, which is a massive one because he was near enough ever present last year. Yukoshlu's gone back to Turkey, I think.
Yeah.
Townsend's gone to Ipswich. A lot of these players are basically in their last year, so they were cashing in. And Thomas Asante as well, one of their strikers, has gone to Coventry. So a lot of turnover in the last 3 or 4 days. Um, I'm not sure Corbrand is overly pleased with that, but we know how good he is. Any of those transfers you like, Angus?
I think it's one of those things where some of this has been enforced on them. Um, it feels a little bit like additions around the edges. I do think, particularly if they are going to be in sort of a difficult situation financially, then getting someone like Paddy McNair in on loan, particularly even just to tide you over till the end of January, um, is sort of a positive move. Um, I don't have too strong thoughts on the other ones. I'm not a particularly big fan of Devante Cole, but we'll see how much of a role he's going to play. Um, in terms of the outgoings, it's obviously some important players, but as you say, it's that getting money now, and I think they've got decent money in general in the circumstances for these players. It's just what they're able to do with it at this point that will be the key. Um, but I think particularly, I know there's talk that they might lose Malumbi as well, and I think if they lose sort of him and Yakushlu, it's they've still got midfielders, but that sort of is obviously makes a big difference. Um, which depending on who they're able to bring in, might be hard to overcome.
Yeah. So Tom has done an updated lineup. Palmer in goal, who's one of the best goalies last year. Furlong right back, Bartley and Najee at centre backs. Obviously, you got McNair as cover. He's put Hegum at left back. Like I said, I think they lost Reach, lost Phillips, lost Townsend. So maybe,
Lost Super Eric Peters.
yeah. Well, he was on trial at Luton at the start of pre-season. Diakate and Mauer double pivot with Fellows on one wing, Carl Grant, who was at Cardiff. Swift in the 10 with Madger up front. So it's okay. Like, it's still a solid team. West Brom they normally have a few youngsters as well that I wonder if they sort of trust and get thrust in to get more game time. So it's okay. It's a solid team with Corberan as manager. I don't think they'll struggle anything like that. But it's put me off going anywhere near them. I don't know if that's the same for you, Angus.
Yeah, they weren't sort of really ones I was considering too much to go to start the season anyway. I think it's just particularly that first sort of couple, um, where they go to QPR and then play Leeds, where particularly combined with what's going on, it was just like, actually, I'll leave it for the moment. It was also just wasn't really sure where I would go with it. It would probably be someone like Furlong, but
Yeah,
just in terms of some of the loss of personnel, I'm like, maybe not at the moment. So that's a little bit of sort of a wait and see. I did think it was interesting in terms of, obviously, I'm sort of doing this looking at the players in front of me, and I noted that predicted lineup did not have Grady Diangana in it, and it did not have Jed Wallace in it.
I think Grady Dingana might be injured.
But that would help explain it. But I did note that those two players weren't in it.
Yeah, well,
Um,
you've mentioned numerous times during the summer that you think, well, Wallace definitely dropped off last year when it comes
yeah,
to a Gaffr asset. So yeah, I'm pretty sure. Let me just see if he said anything at the. Oh, he did say Dean Garner's out to 4 to 6 weeks.
right. Okay, that makes sense. Yeah, I mean, Jed Wallace, I was going to say, he's had this price drop this season. Um, he actually ended up doing very little last season in terms of outputs. Not sort of questioning his work rate or anything.
Mm.
We saw him particularly. He would go up top and do a job for the team as well. But I think his output certainly dropped off last season, and it's one where I'm not necessarily shocked to hear him out of that predicted lineup. I think he'll still be, you know, someone who features regularly for them, but it wouldn't surprise me if he dropped out of the starting lineup. I think losing Diangana to start the season is not ideal. Fellows is someone who it would be interesting to see if he can back up what he did last season, but if he can, he's one particularly as it goes along at 7 that could be an option as it goes along.
Yeah, I agree. Tom reckons he didn't do an updated prediction. He did say sixth, but my guess is that might be a bit less now. Which with what they did last year and Corbrand, I think they would have been around the playoffs. I think you probably have to drop them down to maybe about mid-table now. I think just the uncertainty, but we know Corbrand got that Huddersfield team into the playoffs, so yeah, I'm not writing West Brom off.
No, certainly not. I'd probably still put them top half just because I think that
Mm.
team with a couple of extras, like there's still enough there, but it's quite light, and all it takes is one or two players to drop off, and all of a sudden it's running into a little bit of an issue. But um, yeah, I think I'd still expect right now. I'd probably still pick them to finish top half. This probably doesn't shape out in terms of the predictions so far. I've probably got like, you know, 15 in the top half,
Well,
like
we haven't got anyone
17
relegated.
mid-table or whatever. So yeah, so I think that they're sort of a wait and see in general, even just to sort of work out what they're going to be this season. Um, Big few weeks for them, I think. Um, we obviously don't know what they're able to do, but there's probably a bit more that they need to do.
Yeah,
Um, and yeah, so unless there's anything on West Brom, we are down to the final team of the preview pods, which is Sheffield United.
yeah. So we'll go over the outgoings first because they got rid of quite a lot of key players. A lot of them through choice. This feels like a rebuild. They had a lot of players that had got promoted twice, and well, we saw what happened last year. That those players weren't good enough to be Premier League players, so that they've had a refresh. Outs, Cameron Archer, Bogle, Max Lowe, Fodringham, Osborne, Jebison, Baldock, Bernie, Basham, Norwood, Egan. I mean, there's a lot of players who have been there for years. So yeah, it's definitely a new era. I like the signings they've done. I think they've been good signings, and if you're a team going for top six or top two, these are some of the signings you would do. So Burrows, highly rated left back from Peterborough. Kiefer Moore, we know about Kiefer Moore. Sam McCullen, another left back on a free from Norwich. They've got Callum O'Hare on a free. Jamie Shackleton, who can play pretty much anywhere. I think ideally it's centre mid, but we could see him at fullbacks throughout the season. Um, yeah, did I mention Bogle also went out? I'm not sure if I did, but that was a big one.
Yeah, I don't remember. I'm just trying to
They
think,
lost
but
Bogle.
yeah.
They lost Bogle as well to Leeds. So I'll just get into what Tomo said. Um, Firstly, before we get into the line magners, what do you think? Good signings coming in?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's some of these players we do know, the likes of Kiefer Moore, the likes of Callum O'Hare, like, these are sort of well-known players to us, but I do think they're smart additions. I do like, um, well, I think they've made two decent additions on the left-hand side of the defence as well. I think Sam
Yeah,
McCallum is not that far removed from obviously having a good season at Coventry. He's had a mixed time since, but I think we know there's still a decent player there, and he's not exactly old. And then Harrison Burrows, who's obviously one of the best players in League One last season, particularly in a sort of, if they do sort of go with a wing back system. But I think either way, to be honest, could be very interesting if he's the starter there. So yeah, I think they naturally had to make some lets players go, make some sales. It confuses me every time going onto the Gaffr site and seeing Sheffield United and not seeing John Egan. Um,
yeah.
that's probably the main one for me. Like, I know there's some others, but the main one for me is when I go on and I don't see Egan there. Um, but yeah, I think they're probably doing something that they needed to do. Like you say.
So lineup, Ben reckons it's going to be a switch in formation. They've been for a long period of time. They've been playing three at the back. He reckons it's going to be four. The goalie's a bit up in the air. I think they will bring in a starter. Grubic didn't do very well in the Premier League, and Davis is normally just a backup. We mentioned when we were talking about Plymouth that they seem to be interested in Cooper, which I think would be a great signing, highly rated. They've got, at the minute, he reckons it'd be Shackleton at right back, although they have been linked with Hoover, who was at Stoke on loan last season. He said Armahodvich and Robinson as the centre backs. With he's put McCallum or Burrows. He's not too sure yet. Will they ease Burrows in because McCallum is quite proven at the championship level? He's then got Souza and Arblaster. Arblaster came in the last few games, a youngster. I think he even captained the team last year for periods. So that'd be interesting. He's then put a front three of Brooks, although he thinks a player might come in, O'Hare and Hamer with Kiefer Moore up front. So it looks like a solid lineup. There's no depth though. They've got a lot of youngsters being involved in training, and even players like Asulu, who's been rumoured to go into Newcastle. It's the signings they've made are good, but they're a long way off the squad wise to maybe be competing. But they could do if they buy some players. There's a lot of assets in here, though, isn't there, Angus?
Yeah.
if we get a fit Callum O'Hare, he could do well. Hamer was excellent for Coventry in that season when he pushed a bit more further forward. Kiefer Moore will probably he'll get double figures if he stays fit, probably closest to 20. And if we get the flying Burrows at Peterborough, he could be a decent option. So, any of these making your game week one, or if not, any others that you like?
So I've moved my draft around a little bit, and Burrows is in at the moment. Um, Obviously, there'll be a little bit of clarity, hopefully, going along. But if not, I might sort of hold off initially and come back to it.
Yeah,
Um, Anyone who listened to us a couple of years ago knows what a big fan I am of Gustavo Harmer. So he'll be one that will be on the radar. I'm not sure he'll make it in game week one, but certainly on the radar. O'Hare, like you say, more. But I think initially, if I do go with one to start with, it'll be Burrows if I think he's going to play.
yeah, I think I'm probably in a similar position. I do sort of want to take a punt on Hamer or O'Hare, but I wonder if it might be a wait and see at the minute, and then you've got, especially that 8 million. There's quite a lot of options throughout the teams that might be a bit more settled or have better fixtures to start with. So to round it off, Tomo basically said all the same picks we did. He did mention if Cooper signs, he'll be 4.5. And he said under the radar could be Brooks if he starts maybe like a winger role. I think he's 6 million. So yeah, getting a 6 million winger playing for a team you'd expect to be top six could be an option. And he said currently have us fourth, but it could be top two if they sign players, which I think is probably about fair. I'd probably have them in probably a bit lower, just getting into the playoffs or around the playoffs, just because they've got a lot of gaps in their squad, especially depth wise.
Yeah, I think that's the issue at the moment, and it's the one sort of thing you'd point to. There's a little bit of sort of like, okay, if one or two players go down in certain positions, what's the plan here? And I think that's the issue. One player I know they've been linked with is Hoover, who we've
Yeah,
obviously seen in previous years. If they bring him in, that immediately fixes one of the glaring issues with Bogle leaving and things like
yeah,
that. So I think there will be additions. I'd probably have them playoffs-ish at the moment. And I think they can push upwards if they do make sort of particularly two or three sort of significant additions. I think they could sort of push upwards a little bit.
yeah. I think that's fair.
So I think that's all the teams. We have now previewed everyone. Um, Hopefully that's been informative. I know it's sort of got me thinking about a lot of players. Um,
Well,
but
I hadn't changed my draft since basically the game launched, so I
yeah,
done a little bit of tinkering today after the first set of pods. So yeah, I'm feeling a bit better with where I am with my lineup.
yeah, it was I had sort of got a draft. The last draft I'd done, I actually did a little bit tinkering after our sort of we did the two pods yesterday. Um, I had Somerville and Sarah as part of my midfield, so it was like, well, that needs changing. Um,
Well, I still had Sparks, the 4 billion Portsmouth defender, wasn't it? It's
um,
Peterborough now, so yeah,
yeah.
yeah. I hope that's helped everyone out. We'll obviously keep you updated with any of the key transfers. I'm sure we'll discuss them on X or Twitter. Yeah, I'm guessing it's a bit tricky because it's Monday night, isn't it? The first game week, Lou and Burnley. So is it a Tuesday nighter?
Probably. I don't think they're immediately going into a midweek game week, are
No,
they?
no, no, I don't think
So I
so.
think it will
I
probably be Tuesday.
I think it's
Um,
League Cup, but obviously Luton aren't in it. Is it League Cup? I don't know. Luton and Burnley aren't in it anyway.
mm.
So yeah,
But yeah, I think we'll probably do Tuesday so that we make sure we've got all the games before we sort of try and do a review, particularly when it's Luton and Burnley. It feels like something that we'll probably have something to say about, um, and certainly want to make sure we've got the opportunity to if anything notable does happen. Um, so that'll be when we next come to you. We won't have anything ahead of deadline. Probably be a little bit sort of going out from the pod account, a few sort of polls, that sort of thing, just to sort of get people thinking about it as the week goes along. Um, and we'll be around to answer questions on there, but like we're not going to do anything sort of formally, I don't think. Um, I'm not going to say absolutely not. I know last year ahead of sort of the deadline of game week one, we did a spaces. I'm not going to say 100% we won't do something like that, but for the moment, I would say probably not. Um, but yeah, we'll be around if people have any further questions, and hopefully, sort of tagging in a lot of the fans of these clubs will help you in terms of signposting off to if you have particular questions as well. Um, but yeah, so all that really, other than sort of enjoy sort of tinkering away and everything, all that's left for me to say really is thank you for listening to all three of these and goodbye.
goodbye.